Hello, I'm Dr. Harper. This video is in project management. It's a lecture video in Wysocki, the hybrid model and hybrid approach. So let's bring up the Canvas in the home page, and even though the lecture down here on hybrid, right here, hybrid and ECPM, even though I have the hybrid Word file here, I want to show you where to find it, because I'm also going to cover, in the homework, I also cover the Golden 3 project. And as you probably already started looking at this, but I'll have a video about that as well on how to do that. But I've decided, going back and forth here, I have one on the hybrid, one lecture video. This lecture video is on the hybrid. Another lecture video is going to be on the crashing of a PERT network, which is part of homework 5, and then I'll talk about homework 5. Okay, so let me show you where all this is. Let's go back to the home page, come down to my website, mdharper.com. Then we go to Project Management tab, and we come down here, Introduction, PMBOK 1, PMBOK 2, etc. Here's Wysocki 8th edition, ECPM. This is the download this. This is a Word file we'll be doing today. In this lecture. Now, another lecture, I'll come back up here and I'll do this Word file for CPM PERT, and there's where I'll talk about crashing, and that file has a lot in it, okay? And I'll do part of that file on PERT, when you crash PERTs and crash CPMs. So that's going to be another video. So this one is going to be the Wysocki hybrid framework. So let's bring up the lecture notes. So in this one, up until now, he's talked about the 4 different quadrants, the traditional projects, and a lot of PMBOK 1 starts with traditional projects, and they're moving into agile and extreme and other types of landscapes. But he started with traditional projects, and even though he uses very similar concepts, he has a little bit different approach. It's a more practical approach. It's more, how do you get this done? How would you actually do this when you start doing it? So one's theoretical, the other's practice. So he kind of takes the theory and he moves into the practical aspects and practice, that's why a lot of universities are using his book as a textbook. It was meant for industry. Now we're using it as a textbook. But then we have 4 quadrants here, the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th quadrant. And so even though he's talked about each of these quadrants, and down here we have the different project management lifecycle models of the traditional, agile with a feedback system, and the extreme with the feedback, where agile has either iteration or cycle, depending on iterative or adaptive agile, back to the plan. So you're going to have different cycles or iterations. The extreme is all the way back to the scope. Okay, and so now that he has identified these, then he says, well, how would you actually do this? How would you get down to the details of actually doing it? And so this lecture on the hybrid here's where he talks about a robust hybrid project management model, where he says, let's look at a framework on how you would approach actually implementing this theoretical knowledge and definitions, and how you would go about it. And so this is a very practical approach to implement the 3 different groups of traditional, agile, and extreme. Okay, he has the ideation phase, just where you do ideas, the setup phase, and then the execution phase. Now he goes through each of these phases in detail. It's an easy read. It's a very practical, well, I think it's easy, but it's very practical, and it gives you really good insight on how he thinks you should go about it. And he does break it out quite a bit. So I'll leave that for the readings. But today, in this lecture, I want to talk about the framework, that this is not necessarily a process. It could be considered a process. It's more of a framework. And within that framework, you have a process of choosing which model to actually use, or how to change the model, or how to actually improve the model. Okay, so he has this framework, and he says it's more than a model; it's a framework. And so here's the process flow through the framework, which he calls effective complex project management. So his ECPM is the actual flow and steps within the hybrid project management model framework. Okay, so his first is going to be the ideation phase, and this is really coming up with what you're doing. And remember back when he talked about the conditions of satisfaction and coming up with the POS, the project overview statement. And that project overview statement is really more like a scope statement. It's saying this is what we're doing, and enough detail so it can go into the work breakdown structure, etc. But he's not going into that detail. He's staying up here and says, okay, we know how to do that, but how do we keep this overview to make sure we move in the right direction? So first, the way you would do this is develop the business case. In other words, what's the environment in which this project resides? And he says business case. Well, it depends on where you are. It could be a business case if you're in business. It could be a research case. It could be an environmental case. It could be a government case. So depending on where your project resides. In other words, identify the environment and what is the case that you're after. In other words, identify where the project fits in to the bigger picture. Okay, then you go to requirements and elicit requirements. What do we need to do this? Make sure those requirements are there. And going back and forth between the requirements and the POS will probably, and actually all three of these, going back and forth in this meeting with your stakeholders, internal and external stakeholders, going back and forth to identify here is what we're doing. Now remember, this is more for complex type projects. This is more for quadrants 2, 3, and 4 than quadrant 1. Now, technically, you would do this for quadrant 1, but a lot of times this can be done within a day, within a couple of hours. You know exactly what you're doing. So this type of three-stage project hybrid model in the ECPM is looking at more of the agile and extreme type models, primarily agile. Okay, so he calls these stage gates. Now, the reason he has stage gates actually is a very, very good practice in business. Have the stage gates say, we are done with this. This is the past. We have a stage gate. We're moving into the next phase. So in other words, you know you're done, not to go back, and then you keep moving forward. If you do go back, and we're down here, we will have a feedback system, we're going back by design, okay, within the framework. So the idea here is once you know what you're going to do, then get on to doing it. And so the reason for the stage gate is to delineate your work, effort, objectives. Everyone's not going to agree. And so you agree to disagree in the ideation phase. Once you have that idea down, your POS down, then whether you agree with it or not, that stage gate moves it away from the POS into the setup phase to where, suppose I don't agree with what we're doing, but if I'm part of this team, then I will agree with it to try to make it work as best as I can. In project management, you have to understand that everything's not going to be exactly the way you think it should be. But once you've passed that stage gate, you're part of the team, and it's just as if it's your decision, and you make it work as best you can. You don't undermine it. I'm emphasizing that because we've seen the opposite here. The opposite does exist. And there's where you have projects and other things that cause a lot of problems. Okay, then you have the project setup phase. So then you determine the project quadrant. So now you know what you're going to do, but then you say, which of these quadrants are we in? Is it agile? Is it extreme? Or even emergency? Okay, and it's usually these three because it's complex. If it's traditional, then usually you shift into the PMBOK type thing. But if it's agile, extreme, or emerge, quadrants 2, 3, and 4, then you decide which one are we going to start in. We're going to start in. And so if you start there, then that requires how you approach the rest of these steps. Choose the best fit PMLC model, the life cycle model. If it's agile, is it going to be iteration cycle? Remember, this is a spectrum. Where in that spectrum are you? Is it cycles? Is it iterations? Or is it somewhere in between? Or it could be extreme. It could be extreme. And he really refers to cycles here because if you have iterations, the feedback system is pretty straightforward. If you have cycles, usually you're closing out a cycle to go back to redesign or to to evaluate your model here. Okay, so you determine your project quadrant, choose the best fit model within that quadrant. Then you address the project characteristics. And he goes through this in detail. No, he doesn't. He doesn't go into a lot of detail. But the project characteristics, where are we? For example, agile. Where are we in the spectrum? We're in the agile type, but we're more toward the iterative than the adaptive. So where are we in that spectrum? Here's your project characteristics, and then that would say, okay, fine. Well, then choose and modify specific model templates. If this is where we're going, then we pull in the templates, and here's the plan. And this is where you look at like the project plan. That's kind of like the work breakdown structure, on and on and on. Okay, this is the plan. Now this stage gate determines feasibility. Up here you determine the POS, the overview statement. Now this stage gate says, okay, we have the project characteristics, we have the type, we have the templates, we know what quadrant we're in, we have everything there. The feasibility says yes. This will satisfy, as best we know, this is feasible. It will satisfy everything we need to do within the POS. And then that stage gate says, okay, we have feasibility. Now we're moving forward into the third phase of the execution. Now we've decided what we're doing. Now let's do it. Okay, but notice the first step in the execution phase is define the version scope. Now this version scope, very interesting. He goes through and talks about the version scope of this. In other words, he defines the version as, yes, we have a type, we have a type, model type, we have a model, we have templates, but the version is saying, if you have an agile project, the solution is going to be changing one way, somehow, somewhere, either significantly or either major or minor. It's going to change. So he talks about this is our version right now. We might not change really the type or the templates, but we might change the version of it because we see maybe a better way to go or shift this a little bit, or this could be more quality, or small changes. So the version scope is saying, here's what this model, the feasibility model that we've agreed on stage gate 2, this is what we're doing. Okay, then once we come down to step 8 under execution, once you define your version scope, then stage 3 is boom, you launch it. So when you launch, now you go into actually doing it, where you planned your next cycle. Now remember, he's saying cycle. So he's referring to the agile, adaptive, the adaptive agile type, because he's assuming we're going to be changing this thing quite a bit. Now, I say agile, and it could be agile. This could be plan the next iteration. It could be plan the next phase, whatever. You could be down here either the cycle, iteration, cycle, or phases. And I don't think he says that, but I will say that because this is a framework. It depends on your project. Okay, this is not set in stone exactly how you do it, but this is, for example, a cycle. Then you build your next cycle deliverables, and then you conduct client checkpoints, and then you do it, and then you have your client checkpoints. Now notice, the client checkpoints, step number 11 is critical. This makes all the difference in the world in this model, and he actually made this point of other models that you see. Because a lot of times, even though they have an agile, they'll think, oh, we're going to make some scrums in here and iterations or different types of cycles, but we'll keep moving forward. But he says, no, you're going to have a client checkpoint. And that client checkpoint is making a decision. It's a decision node. And that decision is saying, okay, this cycle is complete, or it's complete in that we're going to continue on further, or it's complete, we have changes to go back and redo it. But this is a client checkpoint to decide the cycle. If so, then we come back and we plan the next cycle and move forward in the project, of the agile project, of the version that we have. But what if this client checkpoint says, as we get into it, begin to realize, wait a minute, this is not what we want. You can go all the way back to a different model type. Move from agile, or maybe we started iterative, we have to move to the more adaptive. Maybe we started adaptive, we have some successes, let's shift to the iterative. Okay, this will be emphasized in the next topic, where you begin comparisons of these things. Comparison and embedding. He does talk about embedding traditional within this. We'll talk about that more in the next topic. But here, this client checkpoint is saying, do we continue on with the next cycle and plan the cycle, whatever it is, or do we go all the way back and modify the actual type, or even modify the model within the type? So do we actually modify it to more iterative with an agile, okay, or even extreme? So this feedback loop really is very significant, because here you can either improve the cycle, go on with the cycle, just continue the project, or go all the way back and something is not working here. We need to go back and actually change the actual model type. So you're changing the actual entire approach. Okay, so notice how I had go to 9 for the agile, if you're still in agile. Go to 5 for the actual model change. You're changing the model. Okay, and then when you're done, you go back, iterate. Eventually, you close out the version. In other words, and here's where the different versions come in. So you're going to shift and change. You close the version, and this close version, he could have said stage gate 4, but really, boom, this is closing this hybrid model framework, because then this goes into closing the project and validation and verification, and validations and sign-offs. Okay, so this is a very I like this as far as the practical part of it. And so up until now, we've talked about theory a lot. And so he really emphasizes that this is not a model, this is a framework. And within this, when you start, you focus more on the project and your needs. But this framework is just a structure that you can be very flexible within this structure and this framework. One of my favorite sayings is from Yogi Berra. Yogi Berra is I consider him the great philosopher of the 20th century. Shout out to Yogi Berra and his family. He said, in theory, there's no difference between practice and theory. But in practice, there is. And that's what Waisaki's talking about. And Yogi summed it up in just a few words. Okay, that's all I have for this lecture. I'll have another lecture on the crashing and another lecture on the homework for the crashing. But this is all I have for this. And between now and the next time I see you, I want to urge everyone to stay safe. Don't take anything for granted. Stay healthy so you can keep learning.